the ones who end up putting all that money into their accounts. Now the Federal Reserve in your day is considered a non-profit entity, but they are not non-profit. In fact, if you were to ask today's congressman who is the recipient of the creation of the money, who gets that value, they probably wouldn't be able to think out the fact that that money is created by the Federal Reserve, and then it's lent to the Treasury, and then it's distributed, it's used by America.
So President, what you're saying then, back in the days of our founding, it wasn't known as the Federal Reserve, it was known as a central bank. And a central bank then was those that weren't particularly interested in America except for the profit that they could make off of us. So many of them had European influence. Today, we have what is known as the Federal Reserve. It's not federal. It doesn't appear in any federal listings. That was just a way to convince the people that it had something to do with the government. But even today, we are controlled by international interests like you were with a central bank in your day. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's why the founders, they said that if you want to maintain your freedoms, the most important thing that you must understand is money. The realization that the creator of the money is the recipient of that value is surprisingly difficult for people to get their minds around. Money, I consider myself reasonably smart, but somehow I didn't even get a grasp on that back in my day. But right from the very beginning, here's these guys creating the money. We got the state banks creating the money, and they're loaning the money to the Treasury. The Treasury then disperses the money and uses it, and those private entities again, they become the recipients. As Thomas Jefferson said, the banks become so powerful that they set the very government at defiance. And so today, as we have an international economy, and these banks are international in their scope, they are creating money not just for America but worldwide, and they are all privately held, just like the Federal Reserve. And so we think that the richest people in the world are billionaires, but the reality is that there are trillionaires, because they are the stockholders of these Federal Reserves. And so being able to control these Federal Reserves and to not create these entities that are absolutely omnipotent is one of the great keys to America's freedom. If America and other countries as well are going to retain their freedoms at some point, they'll have to do it like Jackson did, and they'll have to return either return the Federal Reserve to its non-profit statutory status, or probably never manage it. Now, in order for that to happen, obviously, there has to be a wise, a righteous, a moral people. I know that sounds, I've mentioned this before, I may sound like a broken record, but America has to send godly men and women as representatives to their state congresses and to the federal Congress, in order for these things to be understood. Somehow these concepts and ideas slip away from a people that are not moral. The early founders, they said, oh, this Constitution is only will only work for a moral people. And that is, most people don't know these things that I'm talking about, but where they fail is in their unrepentant state. They do not send godly people to represent them, and so then we lose our freedoms as the people become lose their their faithfulness, their connection, their obedience to the God of the land. In the Constitution, it says, in the year of our Lord, which was a declaration of the founders' belief in Jesus Christ. All the families, the early families, it was hoped that every family would have somebody who would become a minister and become a preacher of the faith. And there are still people today, all throughout America, that are godly people, but I wonder sometimes if maybe there's not quite as much of a foundation of faith, should I say, or an element of faith in today as there was. Of course, in my day, we had lost that as well, and we went through a very painful repentance process.
Well, President, thank you so much for that. My next question would be if you would address the benefits or the dangers of free public education.
So that's an interesting thing. You're asking me an interesting question because we have the word public again, and so it sounds like somehow it must be by the people, but public education would maybe more appropriately be called government education. Maybe
well, it's kind of like they have this broadcasting company called Public Broadcasting. All that really means is government broadcasting.
And that's a good parallel. So yeah, very very similar. So yeah, so public education is really it is certainly in your day today. It's government education, and so those as we look and we see what is being taught, for example, in the 60s, not in my 1860s, but in your 1960s, it became illegal. I don't think it was even legal to pray back in the 1960s, and so federal education suddenly became a non-Christian, non-prayed type of education, and the books and the materials all followed suit.
Well, and with that, evolution moved over creation. They put them down together side by side, and then they moved creation out, and now the only thing being taught is evolution, humanism. In 1973, as you probably were aware as you were reading some of those older articles, Roe versus Wade in 1973 allowed for the wholesale slaughter of the unborn. And the estimates are wide-ranging, anywhere from 75 to 100 million or more children never took their first breath. One last question, President. Thank you so much. Talk to us why the Second Amendment was placed in our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and why that is so vital to our freedom.
So the essence of the miracle of America is a limited government. And the limiting of that government, of course, is done through the Constitution. And the Constitution is not really designed to limit the people, it's designed to limit the government. And an armed populace has the ability to limit a government as well. The military has obviously a much more potent technology. They have bombs that the common man doesn't have. Common man is likely to have maybe not even have anything, but if he has something, maybe it's a pistol, maybe it's a hunting rifle to hunt deer with. But an armed population becomes a limiter on the government, and without that, then that limit in power is taken away. So limit.
President, I look at our government as having at least 3 votes against the government. And of course it's the vote to who we elect. But it seems like today regardless of whether the party is Democrat or Republican, we're sending a conservative communist or a liberal communist to Washington. I guess that's not vogue anymore or popular, so let's say Marxist socialists. The next, so that's in Congress. We get those votes. And then we get votes at the ballot box. Then we get votes at the jury box. But nowadays, the judges are telling us, I will tell you what the law is, you determine the facts in the case. So they're trying to do away with jury nullification. Would you talk to us about jury nullification for a moment?
It's another limit on an out-of-control government. As governments exist and as they feel like they are fulfilling their purpose, which is to be legal and to make laws. Oftentimes, they make laws that are not constitutional. They do not preserve the people's freedoms, and so the jury's right to say, oh, that's an inappropriate law. So if the government passes a law that if you don't brush your teeth, you are going to be killed, something silly. Many of the laws today are almost that ridiculous. I mean, if we knew some, we could probably put them out, and people would be like, I don't think that's really a law. But many of them are so. In fact, there was a even more ridiculous law, number 55, saying all Mormons can be killed, and they need to be driven from the state of Missouri. So you can see that the governments can run astray, and the essence, the reason that a jury is even instituted is it's a limit in fact, it's a limit in power. If all we wanted to do was say that the judge gets to decide, we wouldn't even need a jury. And so if the judge can say the jury must decide as I wish, then the essence of the jury is taken away. And so the jury, in order to preserve freedoms, it must have the right to have its own common sense and to say this law is not just. I will not enforce it. He is guilty of the law. He broke this law. He failed to brush his teeth. So yes, he should be killed. But they can say, I don't think that that's an appropriate law. I will nullify, and this man will go free.
Another example, I don't know if there were bootleggers in your day, probably not, but in the 1920s they passed a law against alcohol. And so alcohol went underground and people started making their own and selling their own. Well, that was against the federal law. And then old Joe Smo downtown, he's making his own beer or liquor, so he goes to court. A jury of his peers. 8 of his neighbors are the jurymen, and they're also bootlegging. Not guilty. The jury nullification, as you'd mentioned, allowed the power to remain in the people so that they could nullify bad law, just like you said. The Second Amendment, though, in my opinion, and I'm sure you'll agree, is our final vote against a run-amok government.
I suppose